Keanu Reeves saves Taylor Swift from flood. The rain pounded against the rooftops like a war drum, relentless and deafening. The storm had come out of nowhere. What was supposed to be a routine downpour had escalated into a full-scale catastrophe in just a matter of hours. Flood warnings blared from phones. Emergency sirens screamed through the streets. And now, downtown was underwater. Taylor Swift stood by the window of her penthouse suite, staring in disbelief at the chaos below. The city she had arrived in for a surprise concert appearance was now completely submerged in murky floodwaters. Her phone buzzed. She snatched it up. Tree Payne, her publicist. "Taylor, where are you? The hotel lobby is gone. We can't reach you." Taylor's stomach twisted. She quickly typed back, "Taylor, still in my room. Can't leave. Hallways flooded. What do I do?" Three dots appeared, then disappeared. No reply. Her heart raced. She turned back to the window. Cars were completely submerged, their alarms blaring from beneath the water. People were wading through the streets, desperate for help. Then, an explosion. Down the street, an electrical transformer blew, sending sparks into the air. A moment later, the hotel's lights flickered and died. Darkness. Complete and total blackout. Taylor's breath hitched. Her phone's flashlight cast eerie shadows against the walls as she backed away. She needed to get out. Meanwhile, a few blocks away, Keanu Reeves was already waist-deep in the flood. His black motorcycle was long gone, swept away by the raging currents, but he didn't care. People needed help. He had been in town for a charity event, but now the only thing that mattered was getting people to safety. Wading through the water, he heard screams. A man was trapped inside his car, pounding on the window as water rushed in. Keanu didn't hesitate. With one swift motion, he grabbed a loose street sign and smashed the window open. The man gasped for air, coughing as Keanu pulled him free. "You okay?" Keanu asked, gripping the man's arm. The guy could only nod, shivering. Keanu looked around. The city was falling apart. And then, he saw the hotel in the distance. And something clicked. Taylor Swift was staying there. His stomach twisted. The building was dangerously close to collapse. If she was still inside, he started moving. Back in the hotel. Taylor pushed through the knee-high water in the hallway, her breath coming in short gasps. She had tried the stairwell, but it was already flooded up to the second floor. The elevators? There was only one way out. The rooftop. Clutching her phone, she struggled forward. Water sloshed around her as she moved, and every step felt like it took twice the effort. She reached the emergency stairwell and pushed the door open, only to be met with rushing floodwater from below. Her heart stopped. She was running out of time. A sound. Something banging on the front doors below. Her heart leaped. Was it rescue? She turned and made her way toward the edge of the hallway, peering down from the balcony overlooking the lobby. What she saw stunned her. A man, drenched and determined, was forcing his way through the floodwaters below. At first, she didn't recognize him. Then the lightning flashed, and she gasped. It was Keanu Reeves. Keanu pushed through the doors as floodwater rushed in behind him. The lobby was a disaster. Furniture floated, chandeliers swayed dangerously. He looked up and froze. Taylor Swift was standing on the second-floor balcony, staring down at him with wide, desperate eyes. Their gazes locked. "Keanu," she shouted, her voice barely carrying over the roaring flood. "You need to get down here," he called back. "I can't," she yelled. "The stairs are flooded." Keanu cursed under his breath. He scanned the room. There was only one way to reach her. His eyes landed on the hotel's grand staircase. It was old, worn, but still standing. For now. Without hesitating, Keanu grabbed onto the railing and began climbing. Taylor watched in horror as Keanu pulled himself up the half-submerged staircase, every movement slow and deliberate. The flood was rising fast. And then, the entire building shook. A horrible groan filled the air. The foundation was giving way. Keanu didn't stop. Finally, he reached the balcony. "You okay?" he asked, his breath ragged. Taylor nodded quickly. "We need to get to the roof." Keanu glanced at the emergency stairwell. completely flooded. Then he looked up. "The maintenance ladder," he said. Taylor followed his gaze. A metal ladder led to an emergency hatch above. The only problem? It was across the entire flooded hallway. A hallway that was seconds away from collapsing. Taylor swallowed hard. "How do we get there?" Keanu gritted his teeth. "I'll carry you." Taylor blinked. "What?" Keanu took off his soaked leather jacket. "You're not gonna make it wading through this." "I'll swim us across." Taylor hesitated. Then another sickening creak echoed through the building. No time to argue. She nodded. "Okay." Keanu crouched. "Climb on." Taylor took a deep breath, then wrapped her arms around his shoulders. Keanu adjusted his grip. "Hold tight." Then he dove. The cold rushed over them, and Taylor gasped as Keanu propelled them forward, cutting through the water with powerful strokes. The current was strong. Every stroke felt like a battle, but Keanu kept pushing forward. Taylor clung to him, her heart pounding. The ladder was just ahead. Something snapped behind them. Taylor turned and saw it. The staircase was collapsing. Keanu swam harder. The building lurched, debris crashing into the flood behind them. "Keanu!" Taylor cried. Almost there, he gritted out. With one final push, he reached the ladder. "Climb," he ordered. Taylor scrambled up the rungs, slipping, gasping. Keanu followed, pulling himself up just as the floodwaters consumed the floor below. They reached the hatch. Keanu braced against the ceiling and forced it open. The rooftop greeted them with open sky and rain. They made it, but they weren't safe yet. The rooftop was a battlefield of wind and water. The storm hadn't let up. If anything, it was worse up here. Rain lashed against their faces, the wind howling like a living beast, trying to rip them off their feet. Taylor shivered violently, her soaked clothes clinging to her skin. Keanu braced himself, scanning the surroundings. The flood had swallowed everything below. Streets? Gone. Cars? Floating wrecks. Rescue crews were nowhere in sight. Taylor hugged herself. "We're stuck." Keanu set his jaw. "Not yet." They moved carefully across the rooftop, avoiding the puddles of water collecting near the edges. Keanu kept looking for anything. A possible escape route, a sign of rescue, something. But there was nothing. The only way off this rooftop was up. Keanu's eyes landed on the adjacent building. A parking garage. It was higher than the hotel, meaning it wasn't completely flooded. If they could reach it, they might find a way down. Taylor followed his gaze. "You're not thinking." "It's our best shot," Keanu cut in. Taylor blinked at the gap between the buildings. It was at least 15 feet across. And the only way to get there? Her stomach dropped. "Keanu, that's insane." Keanu turned to her. "Do you trust me?" Taylor hesitated. Then she looked around. The rooftop was starting to crack under the strain of the flood. They didn't have time to wait for a miracle. She exhaled sharply. "What's the plan?" Keanu tested the edge of the rooftop. The parking garage was just close enough that he could make the jump. But Taylor? She wouldn't make it alone. "You go first," he told her. She took a step back, her face pale. I can't." Keanu gripped her shoulders. "Yes, you can. I'll be right behind you." Taylor swallowed hard. She backed up, took a deep breath, and ran. Her foot hit the edge. She leaped. For a terrifying second, she was in free fall, the howling wind pulling at her. Then, her hands slammed onto the ledge of the garage. Her grip slipped. She screamed. "Keanu!" Keanu was already moving. He sprinted, launched himself off the rooftop, and caught her wrist midair. For a moment, they were both dangling over the flood, nothing but storm and death below them. Keanu's muscles screamed as he pulled them both up. "What? A time." Finally, they collapsed onto the rooftop of the parking garage, gasping for breath. Taylor's hands trembled. "That was the craziest thing I've ever done." Keanu smirked. "You did good, kid." She laughed breathlessly, shaking her head. "I think I just lost 10 years of my life." "Yeah," Keanu grinned. "Me too." But they weren't safe yet. They moved deeper into the parking structure, the sound of the storm echoing around them. Keanu pulled his phone out. Still no signal. Taylor groaned. Great. We made it off the roof, but we're still stranded. Keanu glanced around. The garage had several abandoned cars, some of them half submerged in water. But then, his eyes landed on a motorcycle. A Ducati Panigale V4. His heart leaped. It was completely untouched by the flood, sitting on an elevated ramp. Taylor followed his gaze. No way. Keanu grinned. Wait. They hurried over. He inspected the bike. The keys were still in the ignition. Someone left in a hurry, Keanu muttered. He straddled the seat and twisted the key. The engine roared to life. Taylor's jaw dropped. You've got to be kidding me. Keanu smirked. Still think we're stuck? She grinned. Okay, fine. You win. Keanu patted the seat behind him. Hop on. Taylor hesitated. Have you ever driven through a flood before? Keanu flashed a cocky grin. First time for everything. She rolled her eyes but climbed on, wrapping her arms tightly around his waist. Keanu revved the engine. Hold on. Then he gunned it. The motorcycle tore through the flooded streets, sending water spraying in all directions. Taylor's heart pounded. Keanu navigated through the debris, dodging wrecked cars and floating trash cans. The wind and rain lashed at them, but Keanu never wavered. They spotted him. A rescue checkpoint up ahead. National Guard trucks. Helicopters. People being airlifted to safety. Taylor's breath caught. We made it. Keanu didn't slow down. He pushed the bike forward, splashing through the last of the flood. As they reached the checkpoint, soldiers rushed forward, waving them in. Keanu skidded to a stop, the bike's tires splashing in the water. Taylor climbed off, legs shaking. A soldier ran over. Are you two okay? Taylor nodded breathlessly. We need to get out of here. The soldier gestured toward the evac helicopters. Come with us, he said. We're getting survivors out of the city. Taylor turned to Keanu. You coming? Keanu glanced back at the flooded streets, at the people still trapped. His jaw tightened. Not yet, he said. Taylor froze. What, Tanya, you can't? He gave her a small smile. There are more people out there. I can't leave them. She stared at him, realizing in that moment exactly who Keanu Reeves was. A hero. Her chest tightened. Then be careful, she whispered. Keanu gave a small nod. You too, Swift. With that, he turned the bike back toward the city. Taylor watched as he disappeared into the storm. And she knew. This was a story she'd never forget. Keanu didn't look back. The sound of the rescue helicopter's rotor blades faded behind him as he revved the Ducati and sped back into the flooded streets. He had gotten Taylor Swift to safety. But he wasn't done. There were still people trapped out there. The flood was still rising. And Keanu Reeves wasn't the type to run away. Back at the rescue camp, Taylor sat inside a makeshift command tent, wrapped in a thermal blanket, her body still shivering from the cold floodwater. The National Guard soldiers were rushing back and forth, coordinating rescues, setting up evac routes. But Taylor couldn't focus on any of it. Her mind was still in that flooded hotel, still on that rooftop, still gripping Keanu's shoulders as he swam through the flood, risking everything to get her to safety. She swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the blanket. A soldier approached. Miss Swift. She looked up. Yeah. You're clear to be airlifted out now. We have a private transport ready for you. Taylor hesitated. Her tour team had probably already arranged everything. A private jet, a medical checkup, security, press statements. She should go. She should leave. But instead, she found herself standing. Wait, she said. The guy I came in with, Keanu Reeves. Have you heard anything about him? The soldier frowned. Reeves? The actor? Taylor nodded. The soldier sighed. Last I heard, he went back into the city. He's still out there? Taylor's stomach tightened. Still out there? She turned, looking past the rescue tents, toward the flooded skyline in the distance. Somewhere in that chaos, Keanu was still saving people. And she was just going to leave? Her hands clenched into fists. Not yet. She wasn't leaving until she knew he was okay. Keanu's next mission. Keanu gunned the Ducati's throttle, sending water spraying up behind him as he wove through the submerged streets. The city was a dystopian nightmare. Flooded cars. People stranded on rooftops. Power lines sparking in the distance. He could hear cries for help echoing through the abandoned streets. And then, a voice. Help. Somebody. Keanu slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop in waist-deep water. A woman was trapped inside a sinking SUV, her hands pounding on the window. Water was rushing in. She had seconds left. Keanu jumped off the bike and waded forward. The water was ice cold, pulling at his legs, trying to drag him down. But he kept pushing. The woman's eyes were wide with panic. "Please," she screamed. Keanu reached the car, planting his feet against the rushing current. "Cover your eyes," he shouted. She barely had time to react before Keanu smashed the driver's side window with his elbow. Glass shattered. Water rushed in faster. The woman gasped, kicking and panicking. Keanu reached in, grabbing her under the arms. "Take a deep breath," he ordered. "I'm getting you out." She nodded frantically, tears mixing with the flood water. Then, Keanu yanked her free. The moment she was out, the SUV sank beneath the water, disappearing into the depths. The woman clung to him, coughing and gasping for air. Keanu held onto her tightly. "You're okay," he assured her. "I got you." She sobbed into his shoulder. And then, a loud creaking sound. Keanu looked up. A building a block away was collapsing. The flood had eaten away its foundation, and it was coming down fast. Keanu acted on instinct. "Hold on," he shouted, lifting the woman into his arms and sprinting toward the motorcycle. He vaulted onto the bike, setting her behind him. "Grab on." She barely had time to wrap her arms around him before Keanu slammed the throttle and took off. The building collapsed behind them, sending a tidal wave of debris crashing into the streets. They barely escaped. Keanu's pulse was pounding, but he didn't stop. There were still more people out there. Back at the rescue camp, Taylor paced back and forth, her nerves fraying with every passing second. She had tried calling, still no signal. She had asked the National Guard, no updates. Where was he? Her chest tightened. She should have gone with him. She should have stayed. Just as she was about to lose hope, a distant rumbling sound. Engines. She turned. A convoy of rescue boats and motorcycles appeared on the flooded road, heading straight for the camp. Her heart leaped, and then she saw him. Keanu was at the front, soaked, mud-streaked, but alive. Taylor ran forward. As soon as Keanu pulled the bike to a stop, Taylor was there, gripping his arm. "You're okay," she breathed, her voice shaking. Keanu gave a tired smirk. "Told you I wasn't done yet?" Taylor stared at him, her emotions a tangled mess. Then, before she could overthink it, she threw her arms around him. Keanu stiffened for a second, then softened, hugging her back. "Thank you," she whispered. Keanu chuckled. "Just another day in the flood." Taylor pulled back, studying his face. "No, really," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved my life. You saved so many lives." Keanu gave her a small smile. "It's what we do, right?" Taylor exhaled, shaking her head. "You're a damn superhero, Keanu." He laughed. "Not just a guy who can swim." Taylor smirked. "Well, next time I'm caught in a disaster, I know who to call." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "Let's hope there's no next time." She grinned. "Yeah, but if there is?" Keanu nodded. "I got you, Swift." She smiled. "I know." As the rescue camp erupted in cheers, and the helicopters lifted off into the night sky, Taylor Swift knew one thing for certain. She'd never forget the day Keanu Reeves saved her life. The flood waters had started to recede, but the damage was already catastrophic. Entire neighborhoods were submerged, businesses washed away, and thousands of people were now displaced. Helicopters hovered above the city, searching for survivors, while military trucks rolled through the wreckage, evacuating the last of those stranded. But for Taylor Swift, the only thing she could focus on was him. Keanu Reeves. The man who had risked everything to save her life. And now he was gone. Taylor stood near the edge of the rescue zone, her arms crossed, scanning the crowd. "Where did he go?" she muttered. A nearby National Guard officer heard her. "Who are you looking for?" he asked. Taylor turned. "Keanu Reeves. He was just here." He brought people in on a motorcycle. The officer frowned, glancing around. Haven't seen him. Taylor's chest tightened. She had been so relieved to see him alive just minutes ago. But now, he had disappeared again. She wasn't leaving without finding him first. Pulling her thermal blanket tighter around her shoulders, she marched toward the makeshift triage tents, where medics were treating injured survivors. Maybe he was hurt. Maybe he was resting. She poked her head into one of the tents. Keanu? Nothing. A lump formed in her throat. A voice behind her. Looking for me? She spun around. Keanu was standing there, drenched and exhausted, but grinning like he had just walked off a movie set. Her body reacted before her brain did. She launched herself at him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. You just keep disappearing, don't you? She muttered against his soaked jacket. Keanu chuckled. Occupational hazard. She pulled back, studying him. There were cuts on his arms, bruises on his knuckles. He had clearly been through hell. And yet, here he was, still standing. Are you okay? She asked softly. Keanu smiled. I've had worse days. Taylor shook her head, a small laugh escaping her lips. You're ridiculous. Keanu smirked. So I've been told. Taylor and Keanu sat near the edge of the rescue tents, sipping from bottles of lukewarm water, watching the aftermath unfold. The hum of helicopters filled the air. Reporters had started arriving, shoving cameras in people's faces, capturing the devastation. It was only a matter of time before they spotted her. And they did. A female reporter, microphone in hand, recognized Taylor immediately. Cameras zoomed in. Taylor Swift. Can we get a statement? Taylor sighed, running a hand through her tangled, damp hair. She had no energy for this. Keanu started to stand. You don't have to. No, Taylor interrupted. I want to say something. She stood up, stepping toward the cameras, her heart pounding. The reporters pushed closer. Taylor, how did you end up in the flood? Did you have a rescue plan? Are you injured? Taylor raised a hand, silencing them. I just want to say one thing, she said, her voice firm. The cameras zoomed in tighter. She turned and gestured toward Keanu, who was still sitting, looking vaguely uncomfortable with all the attention. This man right here, Taylor said, pointing directly at him, saved my life. The crowd went silent. Keanu's eyes widened slightly. Taylor continued. When the flood hit, I was trapped. No way out. And this guy, he came back for me. He swam through a sinking hotel, carried me through the flood, and literally drove me out of hell on a motorcycle. The reporters leaned in. You're saying Keanu Reeves saved you? One of them asked, clearly stunned. Taylor nodded. Not just me. Dozens of people. He didn't have to, but he did. She glanced at Keanu. And he's not going to brag about it, so I will. Keanu let out a small chuckle, rubbing the back of his neck. The reporters exploded with questions. Keanu, why did you stay behind? Did you plan on being a rescuer? Are you a real-life action hero? Keanu finally stood up, shoving his hands into his soaking wet jeans. He sighed. I'm just a guy who couldn't leave people behind, he said simply. The cameras loved it. The headlines were already being written. Keanu Reeves, real-life hero. Taylor Swift saved from flood, by John Wick himself. Taylor leaned in and whispered, You're gonna break the internet? Keanu smirked. Again. Taylor laughed. Later that evening, Taylor was wrapped in fresh blankets, sitting next to a fire pit the rescue team had set up. Keanu sat beside her, a cup of coffee in his hands. Their clothes had finally dried, but exhaustion was starting to hit. Then, Taylor's phone buzzed. Somehow, despite everything, she still had 5% battery left. She glanced at the screen, and her eyes widened. Keanu noticed. What? She slowly turned the screen toward him. Elon Musk calling. Keanu blinked. Why is Elon Musk calling you? Taylor laughed. I have no idea. She answered. Taylor, Musk's unmistakable voice came through. I saw the footage. Taylor raised an eyebrow. Which footage? The flood. Keanu saving you. Him rescuing people? Keanu groaned. Oh God. Taylor grinned. Yeah. What about it? Musk's voice was amused. I think we need to get him a Cybertruck. Or at least some kind of superhero vehicle. Keanu shook his head. I'm good. Musk continued. But seriously, Taylor, I have an idea. I'd like to talk to you both about something big. Taylor exchanged a glance with Keanu. This was getting interesting. What kind of big? Taylor asked. Musk paused, then said, let's just say, I think the world could use more real-life heroes. Keanu took a slow sip of his coffee. Not sure I like where this is going. Taylor grinned. Let's talk. By the time Taylor and Keanu finally got back to civilization, the world had changed. The internet was on fire. Hashtag Keanu Saves Swift was trending globally. There were memes, news stories, and fan theories. Some of the wildest headlines included heavy checkmarked Taylor Swift and Keanu Reeves, the unexpected duo we never knew we needed. Heavy checkmarked John Wick versus The Flood, and he won. Heavy checkmark did Taylor Swift just find her real-life bodyguard? Taylor scrolled through the tweets, laughing. Keanu shook his head. This is ridiculous. Taylor smirked. Welcome to my world. Keanu sighed. Next time, I'm saving people in stealth mode. Taylor grinned. Too late, Reeves. You're officially a legend now. Keanu groaned. Great. Taylor laughed. But deep down she knew. This was just the beginning of a friendship that the world would never stop talking about. Taylor stared at her phone, still holding the call with Elon Musk, trying to process what was happening. Keanu was watching her, arms crossed, his expression somewhere between amusement and exhaustion. She covered the mic and whispered, he wants to meet. In person. Keanu sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Of course he does. She raised an eyebrow. Come on, you're telling me you're not even a little curious? Keanu took another sip of his coffee, considering. Curious? Sure. But every time Musk gets involved, things get weird. Taylor smirked. That's the fun part. Keanu exhaled slowly, watching as Taylor uncovered the mic and spoke back into the phone. All right, Elon, we're listening. What's your idea? There was a brief silence on the other end before Musk's voice came through, casual but loaded with intention. The world is watching. You two went from being caught in a flood to becoming global symbols of resilience. People love stories like this. And I think we can turn this into something bigger. Taylor exchanged a glance with Keanu. Bigger how? Musk chuckled. I'll explain when you get here. My jet is ready. You in? Keanu muttered under his breath, shaking his head. Taylor covered the mic again and whispered, I know this is insane, but when else are we ever going to get a chance like this? Keanu held her gaze for a long moment, then sighed, running a hand through his hair. Fine. But if he tries to send us to Mars, I'm out? Taylor grinned and put the phone back to her ear. I must. Less than 2 hours later, they were stepping onto a private jet, the engines humming as they settled into oversized leather seats. Taylor leaned back, exhaling, still trying to process how her day had gone from nearly drowning to flying off to meet Elon Musk with Keanu Reeves. Life was unpredictable, but this was a new level. Keanu sat beside her, arms crossed, looking out the window as the jet took off. You ever get the feeling that you're being dragged into something ridiculous? Taylor laughed. Welcome to my life. A few hours later, they touched down at a private airstrip in Texas, not far from the SpaceX launch site. A convoy of sleek, futuristic-looking Teslas waited for them on the tarmac. As soon as they stepped off the jet, a man in a suit greeted them, motioning toward the cars. Mr. Musk is waiting. Taylor raised an eyebrow. You guys always this dramatic? The man didn't even blink. Only when necessary. Keanu sighed as they slid into the back seat of one of the Teslas. I already regret this. The car drove itself, navigating the vast desert landscape before pulling up to what looked like an underground bunker entrance. Taylor frowned. This is feeling more and more like a supervillain's lair. Keanu smirked. Told you, Musk is a wild card. They stepped inside, where the walls were lined with digital projections of futuristic designs, Mars colonies, AI simulations, next-gen robotics. And there, standing in the middle of it all, was Elon Musk, casually dressed in a Tesla t-shirt and jeans, grinning like he had just discovered fire. Welcome, he said, spreading his arms. Glad you made it. Taylor folded her arms. You flew us across the country. Spill it. What's the plan? Musk gestured to the screens. The world just watched a real-life hero story unfold. Keanu, you didn't just save Taylor. You saved families, kids, strangers. You didn't wait for someone else to step in. And Taylor, you used your platform to amplify that. People want more stories like this. They need them. So, I have a proposal. Keanu rubbed his temples. Oh God. Here we go. Musk smirked. A global initiative. A real-life response team. Disaster relief, emergency rescues, high-risk situations. Not just some charity. An elite task force of people willing to act when governments stall. Taylor blinked. Are you saying you want us to become like real-life action heroes? Musk's grin widened. More or less. Keanu leaned against the wall, arms crossed. So, let me get this straight. You want to bankroll a team of people to just, what? Show up when things go south? Musk nodded. Exactly. Think of it as a mix between first responders and a high-tech rescue force. Fast deployment, cutting-edge technology. The world needs heroes, and most of the time, bureaucracy slows them down. You too have the trust of the public. This could be something real. Taylor shook her head in disbelief. This is insane. Musk's eyes sparkled. The best ideas always are. Keanu studied him carefully. And let me guess, you already have a name for this, don't you? Musk smirked. Project Phoenix? Taylor scoffed. Oh, that's subtle. Musk ignored her. I'll handle the logistics, the tech, the funding. You too? You'd be the face of it. People need hope, and right now, they see that in you. Keanu exhaled. I was just trying to get people out of a flood, man. I'm not a superhero. Musk tilted his head. Tell that to the internet. Taylor tapped her fingers against her thigh, thinking, this is crazy. Keanu nodded. Wildly, Taylor bit her lip, looking at him. But it could also be something real. Something important. Keanu studied her for a long moment, then ran a hand through his hair. I can't believe I'm even considering this. Musk grinned. That's the first step. A few minutes later, they were walking down a sleek hallway as Musk showed them some of the early technology he'd been developing: self-sustaining emergency shelters, AI-driven search drones, advanced mobility suits. Taylor stopped in front of a display screen, where a live feed was showing another part of the world. A city recovering from an earthquake, people struggling to rebuild. Her chest tightened. If we actually did this, how soon could we start? Musk looked at Keanu. That depends on you. Keanu let out a breath, looking around the facility, taking in the possibilities, the sheer insanity of it all. Finally, he turned back to Musk and Taylor. All right, let's see where this goes. Musk clapped his hands. Fantastic. Now, let's talk uniforms. Keanu groaned. Taylor laughed. She had no idea where this was headed, but one thing was for sure. Her life had just changed forever. The aftermath of the rescue mission felt like a whirlwind. Keanu and Taylor stood at the edge of the helicopter landing zone, watching as the last survivors were airlifted to safety. The city they had just saved was still in shambles, but their part was done, for now. Keanu's body ached from the hours of physical labor, but there was something deeply satisfying about knowing they had made a difference. He wiped the sweat from his brow and turned to Taylor, who was scanning the area. You good? Keanu asked. Taylor nodded, but there was something in her eyes, a deep, unshakable weight. I'm fine. Just thinking. Keanu raised an eyebrow. About what? She paused for a long moment before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. What if we can't always save everyone? What if we miss someone and we can't get there in time? Keanu's face softened, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. He understood. The burden of heroism was heavy, and it wasn't always about the success. It was about the losses they couldn't prevent. You can't save everyone, Taylor, he said, his voice calm but firm. But that doesn't mean we stop trying. Taylor met his gaze, and for the first time, a small smile tugged at her lips. I guess you're right. Before Keanu could respond, they were interrupted by a loud buzzing, the unmistakable sound of a drone approaching. Keanu turned and saw one of Musk's team members coming toward them, holding a tablet. "Keanu, Taylor, we've got an update," the technician said, breathless. Keanu nodded, stepping forward. "What's the situation?" The technician handed over the tablet, and Keanu's eyes immediately locked onto the screen. It showed live footage of another disaster zone, this time in South America, where a massive earthquake had hit a densely populated area. "The government's response is slow," the technician said. "They've requested Project Phoenix's immediate assistance. There are thousands trapped and little support." Taylor stepped closer, peering at the screen. "It's the same situation we just dealt with, but worse." Keanu stared at the footage, his face grim. "We leave tonight, don't we?" The technician nodded. "Musk's already making arrangements. You two are heading out first thing in the morning." Keanu glanced at Taylor, then back at the technician. "All right, let's do it." Back at the facility. That evening, as they prepped for their next mission, the weight of the public response hit them. The footage of their previous rescue had gone viral, and the news had spread far and wide. Headlines were plastered everywhere, detailing their heroic actions and the lives they had saved. Taylor had even made a heartfelt statement about the mission, calling for more global cooperation in times of crisis. Now, every moment was being scrutinized by the media. "Keanu, Taylor, are you ready for the next challenge?" a reporter asked as they entered the briefing room, cameras flashing all around them. Keanu didn't answer, instead focusing on the map of the earthquake zone projected on the wall in front of him. But Taylor, ever the professional, turned and smiled, nodding. "We're ready. There's no time to waste." As they spoke with the media, a flood of new information came in. There was still no help from the government in certain parts of the disaster zone, and the local emergency services were overwhelmed. Time was running out. Taylor couldn't help but feel anxious. The weight of the responsibility was heavy. They weren't just participating in high-profile rescue missions anymore. They were expected to lead them. Keanu could sense the change in her. He'd noticed the shift in her demeanor ever since they completed the last mission. It wasn't just the exhaustion, it was the pressure, the knowledge that what they were doing had just become bigger than they were prepared for. "Hey," he said quietly, pulling her aside when the cameras were turned away. "You okay?" Taylor forced a smile. "Yeah, I'm fine." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "That's a lie." She sighed. "I'm just thinking about everything we've done so far. The mission was successful, sure, but there's always someone else in need. I can't help but wonder if we're really making the difference we're hoping for." Keanu placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're making a hell of a difference, Taylor. We both are. And we've just started. There's no turning back now." Her expression softened. "I guess you're right, but what if we can't keep up? What if the whole world expects us to keep doing this, to keep saving people?" Her voice trailed off. Keanu took a deep breath, his usual confident demeanor showing through. "Then we'll keep going, no matter how tough it gets. Because we can't stop now, Taylor. There are people out there who need us." She nodded, though a small knot still lingered in her stomach. "All right, let's do this." The mission in South America. The next morning, Keanu and Taylor boarded a military transport plane with their team, heading towards South America. The sky was cloudy and the air heavy with tension. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. They were headed into one of the most dangerous disaster zones the world had seen in years. As they neared the earthquake zone, Keanu and Taylor were briefed on the specifics of the mission. They would be part of a first responder team tasked with locating survivors, navigating unstable infrastructure, and helping to clear the debris. The task was daunting, but this was what they had trained for. The plane touched down in a field just outside the city, and Keanu immediately felt the difference. This wasn't just a typical natural disaster. This was an urban area filled with collapsed buildings, imminent aftershocks, and a population in a state of panic. "This is bad," Taylor whispered as they stepped off the plane, surveying the destruction around them. Buildings had crumbled into piles of debris, and people were already flooding the streets, desperate for food, shelter, and medical attention. Keanu's eyes darted around, scanning the area. He had seen his fair share of disaster zones, but this one felt different. It wasn't just about rescue operations anymore. It was about maintaining hope. A local rescue leader approached them, his face grim. "We've already tried to make it into the city center, but the ground keeps shaking. There's a building in the heart of downtown where we think a lot of people are trapped." Keanu nodded. "We're on it." Taylor looked at him. "Let's do this." They suited up in their exoskeletons, and as soon as the mission briefing was over, they set out with their team. The journey to the collapsed building was treacherous. The earth had shifted, making it nearly impossible to navigate by foot. The aftershocks rattled the ground beneath them, and Keanu could feel the tension mounting. Every step was risky. Every corner they turned could lead to new dangers. As they reached the main building, Keanu and Taylor had to move quickly. Time was running out. They'd already lost precious minutes. "All right, we have survivors here," Keanu said, pointing to a section of the building that seemed to have structural integrity. "We need to get inside." With heavy machinery and their exoskeletons, they breached the entrance, and the real work began. The first survivors they found were disoriented but alive. One by one, Keanu and Taylor helped lift the trapped victims to safety, using all the strength their suits provided. But they knew the danger wasn't over. The building could collapse at any moment. Every minute they spent inside felt like an eternity. Finally, after hours of work, the last survivors were rescued. The building was still standing, but just barely. Keanu and Taylor watched as the emergency vehicles carried the survivors to safety. As they stood in the middle of the wreckage, Keanu turned to Taylor. "We did it." Taylor exhaled deeply, her face flushed with exhaustion but a sense of pride in her eyes. "We did. But we're not done." "Not yet?" Keanu smiled, the weight of the mission already settling in for the next one. They weren't finished. There was always more to do. The days following the successful mission in South America felt like a blur. Taylor and Keanu had barely caught their breath before they were being flown out to their next disaster zone. The world was already watching, and the media was frenzied, projecting their every move, hanging on their every word. As soon as they landed in the next city, the first question that came from the media wasn't about their latest rescue. It was about what was next. They were the faces of Project Phoenix, and people expected them to keep delivering no matter the cost. Keanu stood in front of the press, his posture stiff, trying to keep his expression neutral. Taylor was beside him, her usual calm demeanor slipping just a little as the cameras snapped photos. There was a heavy weight hanging over them. "Keanu, Taylor, how do you feel about becoming global symbols of resilience?" a reporter asked, her voice filled with anticipation. Keanu shifted, glancing at Taylor before answering. "We don't do this for recognition. We do it because people need us." The cameras clicked as Taylor gave a quick nod of agreement. "This isn't about fame. It's about saving lives. That's all that matters." But despite their composed responses, they both knew it wasn't that simple. There were expectations now, and the world was already demanding more from them. More rescues, more lives saved, and more risks taken. As the press conference ended, the questions only continued. Keanu could feel the pressure tightening around him. The weight of it all was exhausting. They walked through the facility where they had been briefed on their next mission, a forest fire in California. The blaze was spreading faster than anticipated, and thousands of homes were at risk. Once again, they were being asked to go in, rescue families, and save as many lives as possible. Taylor glanced at Keanu as they walked down the long corridor of the facility. "This is a lot," she said quietly. "How do we keep up with this?" Keanu gave her a tired but understanding look. "I don't know. But we don't have much choice." The air was thick with smoke as Keanu and Taylor geared up for their next mission. They were suited in their exoskeletons, which had been upgraded with fire-resistant materials and additional tools for rescue operations in extreme conditions. Their team was heading to a rural area where the fire had already destroyed homes and was now threatening the nearby forest. There was no time to waste, families were trapped in their homes, and the fire was moving fast. "This place is a nightmare," Keanu muttered as they boarded the helicopter that would take them to the front lines. The heat from the fire was visible from miles away, a massive cloud of smoke blocking out the sun. Taylor was silent, staring out the window. She was mentally preparing herself for what was to come. Every rescue mission had taken a toll on her, and she knew this would be no different. Lives were at stake. When they arrived, the heat was overwhelming. The fire had already devastated entire neighborhoods, leaving nothing but ash behind. The air smelled of burning wood, and the roar of the fire was deafening. Keanu and Taylor joined their team, who were already working to rescue families from the edges of the fire. Their task was simple: find the survivors, get them to safety, and do it fast. They moved quickly, cutting through the thick underbrush with their enhanced exoskeletons. Taylor's heart raced as they reached the first house, a wooden cabin engulfed in flames. They could see the silhouettes of people inside, trapped, with no way out. Keanu wasted no time. "We need to get in there now," he ordered. They approached the house, the heat growing more intense with each step. Keanu used his strength to break down the door, and together they entered the house. The heat was suffocating, and the smoke made it hard to see. But there was no time to waste. They found the family, 2 parents and their 2 children, huddled together in the corner. "We're here," Taylor said, her voice firm but calm. "We're going to get you out." Keanu led the way, helping the family to their feet. The flames were closing in, and the temperature inside the house was unbearable. Every second counted. As they made their way to the door, Keanu heard a loud crack from above. The roof was beginning to collapse. "Move!" Keanu shouted. They scrambled through the doorway just as the ceiling above them caved in, sending debris crashing to the ground. Taylor helped the children, pushing them forward. They reached the door, and Keanu pulled them out of the house just as it was consumed by the fire. They made it out, but there was no time to celebrate. The fire was still spreading, and they had more families to rescue. The hours dragged on, each rescue taking more and more out of Keanu and Taylor. They were exhausted, drenched in sweat, their bodies aching from the strain. But they couldn't stop. There were more lives to save, and the fire wasn't slowing down. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the final evacuation zone. The fire was still raging, but they had managed to rescue most of the families in the area. Keanu and Taylor stood near the edge of the line, watching as survivors were airlifted out by helicopters. Taylor took a deep breath, wiping sweat from her forehead. "We did it," she said softly. Keanu exhaled, his eyes tired. For now, they both knew that this wasn't over. There would always be another disaster, another mission, another challenge. The world would always need them, and that meant they would never get to stop. As the sun began to set behind them, casting a fiery glow over the wreckage, Keanu and Taylor stood side by side, silently watching the evacuation. Keanu broke the silence. "Do you ever wonder what happens when we can't save everyone? When we can't get there in time?" Taylor glanced at him, and for a brief moment, she saw the weight in his eyes. She knew he was asking because he felt the same way. The burden of heroism was heavy, and sometimes it was hard to live up to the expectations. But Taylor smiled, the exhaustion still present in her eyes. "All we can do is keep trying. As long as there's someone to save, we can't stop." Keanu nodded. "Yeah, you're right." As the last helicopter lifted off, Taylor and Keanu turned to walk back toward their transport. The sun had set, and the city was quiet for the first time in hours. There was a sense of peace now, but the battle wasn't over. It never would be. The world would keep turning, and so would they. By the time they returned to their base, the media had already turned the mission into another global story. Headlines blared about the heroic actions of Keanu and Taylor, painting them as real-life superheroes. The world was fascinated by the duo, a musician and an actor turned into rescue legends. Keanu sat in front of the TV in their brief break room, watching the news coverage. Taylor joined him a few moments later, holding a cup of coffee in her hands. "Is this what you signed up for?" Taylor asked, her tone laced with sarcasm as the news anchor detailed their latest rescue mission. Keanu shrugged, his eyes still glued to the screen. "Not exactly. But it's hard to complain when people are actually starting to understand what we're doing." Taylor took a sip of her coffee. "Yeah, but at what cost? The world's waiting for us to keep saving lives, and the more we do it, the harder it gets to keep up with the demand." Keanu turned to her, his expression serious. "That's the burden we signed up for. We do this because people need us. It's not about the recognition, it's about the lives we save." Taylor nodded slowly, looking out the window at the now calm city below. You're right. But sometimes it feels like we're just getting started, and the world is already expecting more than we can handle. Keanu sighed and leaned back in his chair. I hear you, but we'll find a way to balance it. We have to. As the sun set on the horizon, Keanu and Taylor knew that they had become part of something far bigger than either of them had anticipated. They weren't just rescuers anymore. They were symbols of hope, and whether they liked it or not, the world was depending on them.